My presentation today, I would be looking at gender and the development debate. Why gender becomes a developmental question. And then I would look at gender and production of class in Africa. A very brief historical account, I will try. Then I would look at labor and the gender question. You are right, Madam Chair. What kinds of transformation labor requires in order to lead social transformation? Then finally, there's something happening. I'll try and chart a research agenda for gender transformation. So, yeah, I'm trying to do something that, in terms of, very briefly, really, I would think that we might want to remind ourselves what gender is about, really, when we are talking about gender, so that during our discussions, we are very clear that we all agree. One would want to say that gender, really, in looking at gender here, one is looking at a set of social relations, of structures and systems and practices in which men dominate. I think that that is important for our discussions. A number of explanations in the past that no longer hold, but really differences between women and men that are played out in behavior and expectations, in our personal identities of ourselves as women and men, are not biologically based. They are also not personal, not some things that run in women's blood or choices that women have made. We also know that historically there have been societies where women have dominated. Those are matriarchies, and women have exercised power and control. None exist at the moment. We have matrilineal societies, but matrilineal societies are just a question of how we reckon descent for questions of property and office, but all existing matrilineal societies are patriarchal. Now, the thing for us as a labor movement, people discussing the question of labor in social transformation, are issues around gender regimes. What are the existing expressions of male dominance and female subordination? They vary, more pronounced in some societies, less pronounced and subtle, but they exist. The issues for us really are questions about household production, paid work, violence against women, and sexuality. During the first day, there were issues about the lost decade and the various developmental decades and all that. One thing is that there was a point in the discussions of nation building that the question of gender became an issue. And we need to remember the whole thing about questioning development, growth as development, and its inability to deliver on the expectations, and questions around redistribution with growth and basic needs approach. We also know within the UN system, the Commission on the Status of Women and the various Women World Conferences and the agenda setting. But I want us to remember how the discussions and the platforms under which the gender question, the women question in development became more institutionalized within the 70s, the whole decade from 75 to 85, various policies and conventions and recommendations, and finally the culmination of the UN Women in 2011, and all the national women's machineries and all that. But significantly, the point I would like us to maintain is how now gender and the question of women in development has become institutionalized, and the fact that whether we like it or not, we cannot run away from it, and that sits very much within the debate about development. Just like the question about structural transformation, what constitutes our vision of a gender-equal society is also debated and contested, ranging from reforming the system and how women can be added on and become efficient development actors, to the fact that really we are operating a developmental system, and it doesn't matter how you tweak it, it can never render and deliver on a gender-equal society. I think that we need to keep this in mind as we go on with our debates and all that. Yeah, a little bit about gender and the production of class in Africa. This, as I've said, it's just very brief, just to remind ourselves that the main economic structure, we are told, really hovered around subsistence farming, a lot of pastoral, hunting and gathering, mining, trading, both local and international. What is contested really is the fact that communal production systems were non-hierarchical and therefore non-exploitative. But there's also evidence of surplus production and the expropriation of that surplus production, because this is very key in terms of building equal societies. And people talk about all these systems of paying, war reparations to various ethnic, dominating ethnic groups after war, and that this was the evidence. How women really were productive agents. They were part and parcel of production. What the existing gender hierarchies were, they were not as nuanced as they were with the introduction of capitalism. But we need to remember that definitely the societies in terms of leadership were male-dominated, and the passing off of office and property were also male-dominated. These are issues that we need to remember. Now, under colonial rule, what is important for us to remember also is the fact that for us in Africa, capitalism did not evolve. It was introduced by an external force with force. We need to remember that. But what did it mean for women's labor? And when we talk about women's labor, we need to remember that within women's labor also sits this whole area of unpaid work and social reproduction. One way of looking at women's labor within capitalist exploitation, which I find useful, is Roberts' notion of articulation. Now, Roberts trying to explain, there's something happening. Okay, it came. That we don't have a system where pre-capitalist modes were wiped away, but pre-capitalist modes were actually deliberately incorporated within the capitalist mode. And this was important because it was necessary to invest as little as possible in wage labor. And that could have only been possible if the pre-capitalist modes was maintained. There are different degrees to which the pre-capitalist modes are maintained. I mean, you have within West Africa more of a larger presence of the pre-capitalist modes as against Southern Africa. So here we are talking about degrees of formalization, and others will say degrees of proletarianism. Proletarianization. Thank you. Okay. But within all this, there was a maintenance of the pre-capitalist modes of production. We find it very useful in debating the whole issue about gender, because this is how we can pack other forms of production relations that are not accounted for in national economies. That sits very clear. I'll come to this as we debate on this. Now, in terms of the post-colonial project, I can go very quickly through it, because then a lot has been said, and a bit of romanticization of the immediate post-colonial nation-building phase. And almost, and in some discourses, almost as if everything would have been okay. But we need to note the fact that we maintained the state as an economic player, but that state was still well incorporated within the capitalist mode of production. There was no break with the capitalist mode of production. There were higher incidents of respecting social wages and social protection norms and values, but we need to remember that. Now, a lot also has been said, in particular the first section before ours also, about internal and local problems, about the state and its ability to deliver. But for us also, this phase that is called the lost decade, that is represented by a certain form of leadership that really has very little political credibility. We need to remember all these, because then they sit within our discussions of how the gender agenda has been charted. I'm trying to do two things, okay. But we also remember the fact that during that stage, there was high economic growth, high employment growth, and the whole notion that really we're going to transform the national economy, and that transformation meant that the pre-capitalist forms were going to disappear. Of course, they have not disappeared. And when we went through this phase of economic decline, the introduction of structural adjustment, what research has shown was that societies survived because there was a greater regrouping around pooled household resources, exploiting women's survival skills. Very, very important. Now, these survival skills were important for a number of issues. We've spoken about the loss of formal sector jobs, manufacturing, with restructuring, privatization, outsourcing, and all that. So women's income became very key for a number of household survival. Yeah. Now, this brings us very quickly to the presence about women's location then within the national economy, when we're talking about national economy. We know that women tend to be located more within the service sector, within the urban, informal, sales and commercial sectors, and then also within rural agriculture, subsistence, food crop production, food processing, and sale. Let me beg your pardon and use just a Ghanaian profile to illustrate some of these things as well. So we find within the Ghanaian economy, I hope it's clear. Yeah, okay. So this is what we have in terms of the Ghanaian labor force. So this is a formal. This is coming from a 2010 population census. Then we have where men are, in terms of the informal economy, here. That's a portion for men and that's a portion for women. I'm sorry. We have to be careful about colors. And then we have here women and labor force participation. Sorry. So this is the proportion of women labor force in the formal and the proportion in the informal. That's to make the debate, because there's a sense in which when we are talking about the national economies, I'll come to that very quickly, but which sector really informs policy and where are trade unions located in terms of policy engagement. Manufacturing, the slice for women is larger, and it's larger because of agro-processing the amount. But here we find retail, agric, and then others. We see that the slices are different sizes and all that. And then this is accommodation and food. This is just to underscore one of the issues that we as trade unionists have to engage, and that within the labor markets also we have gender issues playing out there. So where women and men are located are informed by the gender norms and structures that we have evolved within our various societies as well. So what is women's work, what is men's work, and to what extent we as trade unionists try to defend terms that are considered female and terms that are considered male as well. Okay. So let's take into detail a few of the issues. I found this debate about gender and structural transformation important because it allows us a more holistic view of what constitutes our economy. And we can only talk about structural transformation if we have a more holistic view, because then what I have done is to pack other areas that trade unions are not engaging. And I find this chart very instructive. This is Kabiye's conception of the economy, which she calls the iceberg view. That in a number of instances when we are talking about the economy, we are talking about just the market, the formal, and underneath it we have the informal, we have subsistence, and then we have reproductive care. The gender question becomes okay. The gender question, in talking about gender and structural transformation, we need to pick up all the other sectors of production that are below the sea. And we can see that they are larger. And in looking, particularly in most African societies, most people are based within here and there. But for us also, in terms of gender, reproduction and care sits very key in this. So here we are talking about the visible, we know price mechanism, allocating resources, the less visible, the informal economy, and then not so visible, the subsistence economy. And a lot of production is based within subsistence economy, and we should not make the mistake and think that it's not part of a capitalist mode of accumulation. If we talk about peasant-based production forms, we take the production of cocoa in Ghana, for example, is based on peasant economy. And that peasant really willingly submits to his or her own exploitation by denying themselves of what is considered their what do you call it? They determine what surplus they gave away, and it's only possible because they are depending on subsistence production. But for us, is this whole thing about care? Okay, so totally invisible, that's what you have here. But we're talking about unpaid reproductive work, and the debate, the point I want to put into this debate is that it underlies the productivity of labor power that keeps the entire economy working. Why do I say this? I say this because, one, it is, well, indeed, it has become very important in terms of the debate. We believe that it's, and for feminist analysis, it sits there, and if we don't take that into account, we tend not to pull out the issues better. Why we do that? We do that because it highlights the importance of women's reproduction burden, the time resources, and ensuing gender inequalities. Because we talk about how women are unable to engage in the public sphere, and the nature of the engagement is predicated on their domestic responsibilities. They have to be at home to take care of children, they have to be at home to take care of women, other women and other men as well. And of course, we mentioned the labor market segmentation, so we need to understand that, and reproduction is very important here as well. The other names for this, we know about the sexual division of labor, gender division of labor, reproduction, reproductive labor, and all that, all kinds of names for it. How does it play out? First of all, in terms of our own analysis, if we take care as productive, then the household is an economic unit. It is an economic unit because really there is production of needs, there's also reproduction of the labor force, and there are also issues about consumption. Of course, we want to underscore the fact that really women carry the bigger burden for housework, and this is rationalized by the male breadwinner capitalist systems. And people have said this male breadwinner underscores labor's demand for living wages, inherent within that. is labor's demand for living wages. And most of the time in Ghana, when they are making the debate, they say we need to have enough to take home and take care of our wives and children. But the fact that women have to combine productive work with reproduction. And we need also to remember that there are beneficiaries. I've made allusions to that. I want to emphasize that as well. The fact that employers, owners of capital, really make no investments in labor force reproduction. So what happens within the context of the home and the family, and we've asked a number of farmers, do you pay your wife? Because every wife in farm households is supposed to render free labor as part of their marital obligations, and people say, well, why do I have to pay my wife? Or people say, well, really, care really is emotive. How do you pay for something that you cannot quantify? But for us, it's the fact that men are free for productive work and leisure, and men, most importantly, are free for trade union work. Because men are effective trade union leaders because they don't have to carry the workload. So we need to have in mind beneficiaries of women's reproductive labor, and it's not just capital, but it's also within the households, men benefiting, and also within the labor movement, also men benefiting within the labor movement as well. So the other thing we need to remember is that in bearing responsibility for labor force reproduction, it's not just the present, but it's also the future, the children, and the fact that capital makes no investment in that, children, and that the next 30 years, the next generation of the labor force are going to be available in a certain state, and which is how come paying for maternity leave is contested. Otherwise, there should be no contestation, because who is going to benefit from that child? The woman has to stay at home and care for. Then pensions are also so low. The past labor force, pensions are low because of women's care labor and taking care of the aged long after they have listened. But we need to remember a few things. One, that women are not a homogeneous group. So women do not share the same, they don't carry an equal burden of domestic work, and other women, as a result of their class, can actually engage other women to take care of their domestic responsibilities. We also need to remember that the men are involved in housework and care work, but it's mainly voluntary, and different levels of care work arrangements operate in different communities, different contexts, and also at the personal level as well. But really, the question for us is that will this allow, in terms of the present male involvement, will this allow an altering of the existing gender stereotypes? Okay. So these are the issues. Let's look at labor and the gender question, because a bit of, in terms of the interventions, people have raised the fact that labor itself requires transformation. So within the labor movement, how does the gender question sit? And so just a few graphs that within, there are different levels of, what do you call it? I just want us to have a global view. Different levels of women as trade union members. And the interesting thing for us in these two countries is the fact that the public sector, that's where women dominate. But this is a global thing that we need to look at. But down here also, we are looking at leadership, membership and leadership. So to what extent are women as members of the trade unions and members within the decision-making structure? So high presence does not necessarily translate into high presence in decision-making. And the interesting thing here for us is Canada. Look at that as well. Okay, this is CTU and ZIMTA, okay, for us in the African industry. And this is Korea. Okay. The other thing also are questions about stereotypes. So where they are there, the leadership is stereotyped. They are less likely to be presidents, assistant secretaries, and all that. They are more likely to represent women on women's wings and everything. The good news is that trade unions have realized that there's a problem and they've been dealing with it. So they have women's wings, and then also promotional, targeting women, building their capacity. So here we are looking at questions like the wings, the bodies, the conferences. We are also looking at questions of quotas. We are looking at seats, reserve seats. And then the fact that the rule books have also changed. So we have the organizational bodies, the women's decks, the gender decks, equality decks, and then the constitutional changes. A few issues here. These have happened, but in terms of our research, we've noticed that there are a few problems. First of all, unions are still dealing with the gender and conceptual confusion. People are questioning really having a separate space undermines the whole notion of union and solidarity. And then really the confusion about class and gender. But men are also disadvantaged. Yes, men are disadvantaged not as gender based, but men are disadvantaged as a result of their class. Then there are also trade union structures. The women's structures are also weak, and the connection between the mainstream also weak. No strong connections between women leaders and the members. We're also talking about the union culture, still patriarchal, male hostility, issues around sexual harassment, and then the processes. So the process is also about the presence of union education for women, support for women's caregiving, and then time for union activities. So these are issues that unions still grapple with. People have said that, well, in order to be effective, there are certain conditions for success. What are the conditions for success predicated on the levels of decision-making powers accorded to the women's structures? Issues about autonomy and integration. To what extent should the women's structures be integrated in the mainstream? To what extent should it be have autonomy? These are issues that trade unions deal with. The questions of union resources. They say we don't have the money. The women's representatives are saying, well, you don't have the money. But if it's one person, just let us have it. And then what are the energies that women have generated in their separate spaces? How do they transform it into the mainstream? And then what's the connection also between women workers' needs and union policies? To what extent are women workers' needs perceived as a proper trade union affairs as well? And then do we have a sufficient core of women activists within the unions with required consciousness to push the union agenda? Yeah. So in terms of setting the agenda, I just want to raise a few issues that should go into the debate. First of all, we can see that there are issues around union structures and breaking patriarchal norms and standards. What can research do to unravel some of these things? We also need to understand more union role in maintaining patriarchy, because trade unions, as they exist in their present structure, also are patriarchal in nature. So we need to understand and what can research do to help us understand and break that as well. How can we bring care, subsistence, and informal economy into the political economy of production? It's important. We need research to unravel that and set research agendas around it. We also need research about sexuality and its commercialization. In particular, notions of masculinity that really privileges men over women and their sexuality, even within the trade unions. And then the connection between patriarchy, between production and reproductive resources. What are the productive resources? What are the reproductive resources? How do we bring into our debate issues of reproductive and productive resources as well? So in this way, we can distill class from gender needs, and we stand in a better mode to lead to structural transformation. Thank you very much.